morning and welcome to Charlie's Corner. Our next topic that we're going to talk about deals with Nelson Alexander. He's the next one in line, and he was born in 1841. The major event that happened in his time was the Civil War, the American Civil War. And so we're going to cut this into two parts. Part one is going to be the why. And part two is going to be the what. The why is going to cover why the Civil War. And then the what is what exactly he did during this time. So, grab yourself a cup of coffee and let's get started. Now, history is pretty unimportant to most people, but actually history is actually just as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic. It should be taught in schools right alongside those three subjects. Why? The biggest reason is that history is okay. You ever heard that saying, hindsight is 20/20? All right, that means that you can always look back and you can see mistakes that were made after the fact because of the outcome of those choices. Human nature is human nature. All right, we all feel the same emotions. We all react in similar ways throughout history, throughout the history of mankind. Okay, that's human nature. That's why we call it human nature. One thing that brought that to my attention was when I stumbled across a poem written by Lord William Alexander in the early 1600s called An Echo. And what he was writing was, I could have written it myself. I've felt those same emotions, the same thoughts going through my head as this guy that lived 350 years ago. All right. We have the choices we make are determined by biological influences and by environmental influences. Environmentally, the way we were raised, the culture in which we were raised, that influences the choices that we make. Biologically, we are genetically wired. So we're actually connected to those before us because the way they made decisions and decisions they made are wired into their brain genetically. And that's why it's important to do your genealogical research. You can find out a lot more about who you are and why you act the way you do, talk the way you do, by looking at the people who came before you. And so there was a couple quotes, and I got them up here. Winston Churchill, quote from Winston Churchill, and he says, "The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see." And then how about George Orwell, who wrote 1984, famous novel? If you haven't read it, I suggest you read it. We're actually going through some of those things right now. And he said, the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. That's actually one of the things listed in the Communist Manifest you do to a society All right, you obliterate their history or you rewrite it, eliminate that history before them, and you can those people will fall more into line with what you are saying. And they're trying to do that now with taking down monuments, and they're rewriting history. Like the Civil War, it's funny about that. I'll tell you about that. Hang on a minute. So two events that recently happened have brought forth the importance of history. One, a reporter asked a presidential candidate what was the cause of the Civil War, and she refused to say slavery. The answer he was looking for, that everybody's looking for, is what was about slavery. All right, and they just crucified her over that. Another event was Tucker Carlson has a interview with Putin, the president of Russia, and when he asked Putin why he invaded Ukraine, well, Putin gave him a history lesson, a Russian history lesson, starting in like 8th century BC. 30 minutes he went off on the history of Russia. All right, so history is important. Okay, so let's have a look for ourselves in why there was a civil war. So I Googled the question, what was the cause of the Civil War? Google it yourself. And what came up was, for more than 80 years, people in the northern and southern states had been debating the issues that ultimately led to the war. Number one, economic policies and practices. Number two, cultural values. And number three, the extent and reach of the federal government. And number four, the role of slavery within American society. And it says, and most importantly. But yet, if it was most important, then why wasn't it listed first? Listed first is economic policies and practices, and we're going to go into that. So, first of all, let's talk a little bit about Lincoln himself, Abraham Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln became president in the election of 1860. He didn't actually become president until 1861, but Lincoln was a member of the Republican Party, all right? There were 33 states in the United States at that time, and 10 of those states didn't even have Lincoln on the ballot. A third of the United States didn't even have Lincoln on the ballot because there was no Republican Party in these states. And so one of the things that pissed off the southern states, these 10 states, is that he wasn't even on the ballot, and now he's president. Okay? And you think about that today. What if a guy is elected president and he's not even on your ballot in your state? Is that going to upset you a little bit? Yeah. Is it enough to go to war? Well, not really, but it's going to really piss you off. All right? So Lincoln, in his inaugural address, dated March 4th, 1861. Let's have a look at that. I have it here somewhere. There it is. Oh, that's the transcript of the proclamation, which we'll get to. Here it is, the inaugural address. Now, in 1861, which is the year the war started, This is in the inaugural address that Lincoln gave. And he states right here, it says right at the beginning, let me come up here. He says, and I'm going to read this, and I quote, "I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so." That's March 4th, 1861. Lincoln said that. Okay. So if it wasn't about slavery, what was it about? We go further down and he addresses that issue. Right. Well, here, if you go further down, he states that if slaves go into a free state and the owner of the slaves comes to that state and says, "I want my slave back," then the state where the free state where the slave is has to give the slave back, has to respect that property of that owner. All right, and actually, Lincoln uses the Constitution to do that. He says, "I therefore consider that in view of the Constitution and the laws of the Union is unbroken, and to the extent of my ability I shall take care, as the Constitution itself expressly enjoins upon me, that the laws of the Union be faithfully executed in all states." He explains it right here. The reason that he went out, or that he went to war with the southern states and sent troops down to South Carolina, was because he states further down in this address that he believes that the Union cannot be broken, that states do not have the right to secede. And he says that our forefathers actually had that in mind when, the country was formed, that this was a union in perpetual. Okay, it was to always be and couldn't be broken. Let's have a look at that. Okay, first of all, let's consider the word union, what it is. All right. A union is two separate entities that come together. They form a contract, they come together, and voluntarily. Okay, and that's a key word. It's a voluntary action. All right. It's another example of a union is when a man and a woman get married. They call it a union, the union of two people. All right, and they have a paper contract that and they swear oaths to each other, and they have that union. Now, is it all right if my wife decides that she does not want to be in that union anymore? Can I hold a gun to her head and say, "No, you have to be in this union"? Can I force her at gunpoint to do that? Well, no. All right. In the same way, you can't hold a gun to the people if they decide they don't want to be in a union. All right. And our Declaration of Independence actually says that. It states that. And if we go back to the early forming of our country, we see that the people have a right to throw off the government if it doesn't meet their needs or if it's too oppressive. Read the Declaration of Independence. I'm not going to go into that. You can read it yourself. Pull it up, Declaration of Independence, full text, and you can read that. All right? This is the mindset. All right? To further support that, let's talk about how our country was formed. The 13 separate colonies went to war against, they joined together, and fought against England. All right? England recognized the colony's independence in 1783. All right. Now, this is 1783. So there's the Constitution of the United States was submitted in 1787. So 1783 to 1787, all the colonies were separate sovereign states. All right. It only takes 9 of the states to ratify the Constitution to make it so. And within 6 months, 9 of the states did ratify that Constitution. And so now existed a government of the United States as we know it today. All right. But North Carolina still was not part of that. North Carolina didn't ratify it until 1789. So from 1783 to 1789, North Carolina was actually an independent sovereign state. And the United States government from 1787 to 1789 actually recognized North Carolina as an independent sovereign state, not belonging to the United States. All right. And then in 1789, North Carolina says, yeah, okay, we'll ratify it. We'll join this union. All right. It was a voluntary action. And it shows that at that time, the mentality of those people organizing and creating our government recognized each state as a sovereign entity coming into a pact or a union. All right. Let's go ahead and cut off part 1 right here, and I'll pick it up again with part 2, and we will continue this discussion on why there was a civil war. All right. So join me next time for part 2 of Why the War. And I'll see you next time on Charlie's Corner.